Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Go to strengthguild.com, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to the Iron Radio collections, and we've got new shirts and new banners for you to support the show. Everything from just a regular banner or regular shirt to ones with sayings on them, like Lonnie's Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree shirt. And some news for you, we're going to have some contests for people who own these shirts and things. So if you support the show, we'll let you more on that later. So if you get in on these early, you can be one of the first people to win some prizes. So thank you very much. Go check out the site, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to Iron Radio Collections and support the show.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm an exercise physiology and sports nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
And this is Phil Stevens. I'm a competitive powerlifter, Highland Games athlete. I run Strength Guild, amongst other numerous things. So thanks for joining us.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet Cert, faculty member at the Carrick Institute, and a bunch of other stuff. And actually at home, getting ready to do the Carrick course on pain reset about gait as soon as we're done recording here.
Real good.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Folks, we have an episode on mail-in news. It's just we've got a little bit building up. There's quite a bit of different things happening, both within the strength sports and in the science realm. I know we have a question or two on Facebook that we can discuss, and I have one from Jim here, it's just timely. He said, why the general fitness episode? Have we lost our focus on heavy lifting? And he wasn't being disrespectful, I don't think, but I wanted to at least touch on it. Jim, I think when we do something like we did last week, or if we talk about something that's not just powerlifting or bodybuilding, well, or strongman, or even grip. I mean, there's quite a few things here. But to me, it gives us all an impression of where we fit. Like, what can we bring to these things? I think I mentioned last week about sort of being an ambassador. You know, like what's our interest, and can we influence those communities just like how we fit with them, I guess. And also, we have been really bad, and I'm addressing all the listeners, we have been really bad about cross-pollinating, right? So being able to connect with other podcasts and things like that. We just had to crawl out of the cave, I think, a little bit. I don't know. Phil, do you have any comments for Jim about...
No, I agree. I mean, it's a way of cross-pollinating and showing these people in other realms. Strength can benefit anybody. It really can. And a lot of them are scared of it, from various sports to just various people. There's still a stigma to it. So the more we can get out there to Gen Pop, the better.
Right on. Well, I think you were pointing out last week that, we're so niche. And, that hasn't changed.
No,
I liked bodybuilding from the time I was 13 years old. You think I got any respect for that in high school? Like the football players or the wrestlers, they all get to wear their varsity jackets and stuff. And I couldn't even say, even my close friends, they'd laugh, like, Lonnie's so vain, because I wanted to build muscles and stuff like that. And I'm unapologetic. But it's weird to a lot of people. It's niche, right? And if we don't say anything, if we're not ambassadors, then, and maybe it's okay that it stays weird to most people or niche. I think a lot of our listeners probably actually thrive on that a little. But, Mike, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I got some crap from a few of the OCR racers that I trained.
Oh, did you?
The show. Yeah, which is, totally expected. But, the one guy was super cool. He's like, well, that's the reason I hired you, is to do, something a little bit different, and a lot of people are just doing it not ultra competitively, just think that running is going to be the answer to everything. And I think that's, slowly changing, and it's just the evolution of every sport. You go back 5 years ago, baseball players didn't really lift all that much compared to what they do now. So every sport's kind of gone through that, evolution, NBA, everything else. So no, I think it's good to have just a little bit of, variety, and also showcase that, hey, we know some stuff about this thing. We're probably not obviously endurance experts. We're not going to do, show after show on endurance, but something like obstacle course racing where it's a mix of both, I think it's useful. And last shameless plug to my client Jessica, who finished first in her age group in Australia for her Spartan race just yesterday. So,
all right.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Yeah, oddly enough, I'm training one of my clients for a Spartan race now.
Nice.
Ever since I got back.
That's funny.
He's doing one at the end of October now. So.
Sweet.
Yeah. Honestly, I think one of my favorite aspects of it is it has face validity, is the concept that everything you do is so submaximal when you're strong as hell. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And that's just a big deal. And I mean, you don't have to be an exercise physiologist to understand that notion, that when you run a race, if everything's at, 40% of your maximal ability instead of 69%, then the whole race is easier, and you really need that. I think Phil was saying last week, you need that reserve, because when you're wet and tired and pissed off at the end of the race, you need some kind of buffer, right? So,
yeah.
Okay. Any questions, Phil? Before we get into the news, let's just try to be segmented here with questions.
Yeah, there's one about pre-workouts and caffeine. Let me scroll up here just a little bit so I don't mess it up. McKay, I'm going to kill your name. McKay Chidester. What are your guys' thoughts on the need to cycle off pre-workout or not? Not only to avoid building up a tolerance, but also avoiding dependence from a psychological standpoint. Any articles or studies would be especially appreciated. Thanks in advance.
What's your thought? I mean, from a practical...
Mine?
Yeah.
Oh, from a practical standpoint, I try to limit it. Basically, I have a pre-workout or lots of caffeine one day a week. And that's for my heavy squat and deadlift day when I know I'm going to need a little extra push. And I find that if I limit it to that, I actually get more out of it. Whereas if I was slamming cans every day or cans of Monster every day or every workout, I don't get that pick-me-up as much as I did. So
Yeah.
I've limited my caffeine recently more in the last 2 years, probably more than I ever have.
Yep.
So, and it seems to be helping. So I sleep better too.
Yeah, right. It's sort of that middle path. I mean, I don't think any of us are going to reject it. We talk about coffee, and I've been interested in pre-workouts and coffee a lot. In 2015, we actually presented data in Yokohama. Mike was there. We were having fun. We had a whole episode on that. Mike was way too tall for the way Japan is built, I think. Yes. But the abstract was the effects of instant coffee on bench press performance, particularly the effects of habituation. And we concluded that there was a blunting, but not an abolishment, right, of the enhancement. Now, we are looking at speed work, right? So we did 50% of 1 rep max in Smith bench pressing. And instead of we are ranging like 8 to 12% enhancement of bar speed and, power, time to peak power, things like that. With naive people, and instead of 8 to 12, it was like 6 to 8%, but it was still statistically significant, right? It was still reliable. So coffee reliably works, even if you are habituated, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, it's the most drank beverage in the world, sort of depending on the culture with tea, but it's like that because it gets your ass out of bed and shakes off the rust every time you do it, right? If you down-regulated completely, it wouldn't keep waking you up, and people would have 1 pot of coffee, and then they'd be like, well, that doesn't work anymore. But it does work every time. It's blunted, not abolished. And that's what we saw in the lab. Again, directly looking at people with weight training experience and explosive lifts. I'm not sure about heavy lifts. I've read papers before that you need more caffeine to cause a performance enhancement in a heavy lift. We gave 2 packs of Via Instant Coffee. That's like not quite 350 milligrams of caffeine, but that's a pretty whopping dose, especially for some of the smaller people in our study. Even Phil felt 2 packets of that stuff. It's strong. Yeah. It's not regular instant coffee. We do it because it's so consistent. I'm not paid by Starbucks. It's just that when you brew coffee, in fact, Mike and I have talked about this over the years, it's a mess, plus or minus, 150, 200, 250 milligrams variance. forget it. I can't do that in the lab. And the VIA we tested with HPLC, and it was plus or minus 3. 3. So that's why we did that. So, yeah, I wouldn't sweat it too much, but at the same time, I agree with Phil. I mean, if you don't want that blunting, I mean, the difference between 6 and 8% and maybe 10% when you're fresh and naive to it, that could make a difference. And it just makes sense to me that you don't want to. You shouldn't be one of these people like some of my students. They walk around with one of these quart-sized monsters all the time. You got to think that you're going to have some blunting to that.
Well, and if you're a strength athlete, that extra 2 to 4% could be a big deal.
Oh, it's huge.
Yes.
Because, I mean, especially you start getting at the high level, you're fighting for that 1% difference. So if you can get a 2 to 4% difference, it could be a big deal. So.
Yeah. And you're right. I think it depends on the goal, right? If your goal is just daily training and you really love your coffee, I mean, I drink reduced caffeine coffee, actually, when I'm at work. Like just behind the podium and that kind of stuff, because it's not go time. I don't know. It's just it's not go time. And I know that I'm still getting some caffeine, but I don't want to ruin the effect. And we've talked about this over the years, too. I mean, there's been famous people. I think Lee Haney called it borrowed energy, meaning you have to pay it back with sleep and food eventually. I like that. Lee Haney was a wise man when he used to give a lot of talks and whatnot and competing. I've always thought about it like lighter fluid, a really strong dose of pre-workout, for example. You squirt it on the coals, and there's this immediate flash of energy, but then it's quickly gone. Eventually, again, you need a big 8-hour sleep log on the fire or, meal to stoke the fire. So, anyway, habituation's always going to be a thing, but we went into that study with the hypothesis that it's not going to ruin it because, it's popular for a reason because it keeps working, at least on some level. So what we found with the physical performance, I think, at least in that case, mirrored the cognitive benefits, Mike, how do you do it? Because I know you're interested in everything, nootropic, and you've done energy drink stuff yourself. I mean, you're writing, if you didn't already, I think you just finished a review on caffeine and whatnot for the ISSN. I mean, what do you think?
So I published on a study on energy drinks, and we was one of the primary authors helping with the new revised ISSN guidelines on caffeine, so the literature review of everything. I definitely agree with all that. I mean, I think it can be useful. I mean, one of the things I look for in new clients is, how much caffeine do they consume? How many pre-workouts do they use? If it's an escalating dose like all the time, there's something else that's like completely off. For myself, I've tracked it in my workout log for, probably like 10 years now. And I find once I start getting above 300 milligrams on a daily basis, usually something else is off. Usually it's sleep, or I'm just, pushing too hard, not enough downtime, things of that nature. Over the past, I'd say year-ish, I've shifted myself and some clients who are more advanced to what I call just a priority day. So kind of what you did and kind of what Phil did. What are their top lifts? Add more caffeine on that day. Like personally, I'll kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. So I'll do that usually on a Monday, because Sunday will be an off day. So I have an off day beforehand. I usually go to bed earlier, get more sleep, and then I'll take more caffeine that day. Even stuff that, not the greatest data on, such as like lion's mane for BDMF, and throw a Halo headset on and a bunch of other stuff and do a longer, more high volume based session. Mm-hmm. Usually higher carbohydrates the day before and the day of. And that kind of helps with more advanced athletes too. You're kind of putting everything in one direction to see if you can push that thing forward by creating a little bit more stress on purpose. But you're not kind of spreading it out where every day is that type of, high priority, like, balls to the wall or high volume type thing either.
That's a good way to look at it. I mean, the way you throw everything at it, that has external validity, right? I mean, Phil and his people, they're not interested in just the biochemical benefit of one thing. They want to bench a lot, right?
Yeah.
So it's throw all things in. This actually came up with a project that we're working on for the spring. If the research question is, does this help an athlete? Then there's going to be some scientists that say, well, you didn't control that very well. And my response is going to be, that's not the question. If the question is, the chemical composition of this special beverage will itself do X, Y, and Z, that's fine. But if the research question is, does it help an athlete in an open label, right? You know what you're taking, throw everything at it environment. Does it help there? That's a valid question. It's just not reductionist, right? But it has more external validity because you're throwing everything at it. So,
yeah, it's the old internal versus external validity, and are you looking at pure outcome, or are you looking at a mechanism? And I think a lot of times in science we get a little bit too hung up on mechanisms, and before we're really sure that the thing even works, right? So the more practical question, I agree, is does the thing work? If it does work, and we all agree that it works, then yeah, why does it work, right? Looking at mechanisms and things of that nature is, to me, a more, I don't want to say valid, but a more real-world application of research.
Yep. Yeah. Because, Phil, I mean, I guarantee when you go into the gym, you don't give much of a damn about the nuance, like which receptor or which hormone or something's particular. If something puts 30 pounds on your bench, you're going to be like, hell yeah, give me some of that. You know?
Yeah, exactly. That's all I'm worried about. I'm just worried about performance. So.
And now, not to say that you're not interested, like, oh, well, I'd like to know how that works, but to Mike's point, why go start plowing around, poking, drilling down for mechanisms when it's actually not that exciting to begin with?
Yeah.
So.
And a lot of times there's mechanistic research on stuff that we're not even convinced may even work. And I get that that's part of, science, and people spend their whole life just looking at a small part of the mTOR receptor, but for people who are lifters who are looking for application, that may not be the best place to start.
Absolutely. In fact, I think consumer angle on this is that consumers, oftentimes when you go read a website, the ad copy, right, weaves a tapestry of fascination based on mechanisms. And in fact, one of our news bits today that we'll get to after the break, specifically, it explores individual ingredients and mechanisms. And advertisers love that, right? I'm going to focus almost entirely on some hormones effect. And I'm going to kind of brush over the idea of how much this supplement actually jacks that hormone, right? Half the ad is about growth hormone, let's say, and they almost try to gloss over the fact that this does very little to growth hormone. It's one possible mechanism, right? So they love to talk mechanisms and get people fascinated, but the bottom line is it's not really making you that much bigger, bro. So...
Yeah. And we could probably go down a laundry list maybe sometime in another episode of how many things, training methods, or supplements had super cool stories that, kind of logically made sense, but when the actual research was conducted on them were basically a flop.
Right. Yeah. Lots of reasons. I had an old salty professor who used to say, just because something seems logical doesn't mean it's physiological.
Yeah.
Right?
That's one of my favorite phrases.
You actually have to go look. You got to go look. Okay.
Peter Lemon, right?
That was actually Wayne Sinning.
Wayne Sinning?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I liked Pete Lemon. Wayne Sinning and I have a respect for the man. Let's just say that. Like, you have some old advisors who, you weren't buddies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But make no mistake, that man was after rigor, and he was, yeah. So, okay. Any other mail? We could just go to break early and come back and then do the news. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, no, that's about it. Yep.
Right on. All right, we'll come back. We've got news on brain stuff, nootropics. I've got some stuff on GMO foods. We've got some stuff on red meat and others. So we'll just come back after the break.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you know who this is. So I'm here to tell you about Dr. Mike T. Nelson's new book, Why You Should Eat Keto. I don't do it because, look at me. Come on, I'm fabulous and I'm fantastic. Anyway, you should text Keto ebook, all in one word, to 44222 to receive your free copy. Do it now!
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more, that's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
All right, everyone, we're back. It's Phil and Mike and Lonnie, and we've got news from within the strength world, science news, that sort of thing. Let's start with the Mr. Olympia competition.
Strength and muscle sport news.
I think we were a little remiss in not diving into this a little bit more. To be honest, I don't watch every year. I mean, a lot of the guys that I'm still interested in, most of our listeners would think are old-timers now. So, and I mean, it's almost funny to me that somebody would consider someone like Dorian Yates, or Ronnie Coleman an old-timer now. And I'm like, well, those guys, that's not golden era stuff, you guys. I mean, anyway. So this happened, I believe, September 12th through the 15th, the Olympia event. I know over the years, there's been this almost historical tug-of-war as the Arnold Fitness Weekend grew and became so broad. It's obviously it's not just the bodybuilding event. I mean, that's almost been completely, overshadowed by everything else. But the Olympia has tried to, keep pace, I think, and at least on some level. There's been changes in recent years. I heard the lineup this year in general seemed smaller and of lesser quality. I just want to talk about the top 3 or 4. The one guy who stood out, and there are some good YouTube videos of this stuff. I'm looking at one here from Tom Nader. But the point being is, I thought that Hadi Choopan was rock hard. He's an Iranian guy. Massive, rock hard. I mean, if you want to see someone's conditioning, often I look at their legs. If they have a lot of separation and vein, they're vascular and that kind of stuff. And he had the size and the hardness. Yeah. And some people you look at, they look a little softer and more watery. I'm not saying that they're not in condition. They're not exactly off season by any means, but usually this is a pharmaceutical thing. They're just holding water that blurs the separation in their quadriceps group and that kind of thing. I did notice that Dexter Jackson, who has been competing forever. I think this is like his 20th or 21st time at the Olympia.
Yeah. Isn't he like 50 years old, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
Is he? Wow.
I think so.
So he took fourth. The video that I saw him in, he looked watery and sort of smoother through the legs, but the video was poor. And that's the other thing too. You know, if you get someone with a phone camera, you know, in the second row, you're going to lose a little bit of this. So the video you look at, I'm sure matters. That is funny though, because if he is in fact 50, that almost reminds me of
50 this year. Yep.
Wow. Like
That's so crazy.
Al Beckles. Do you guys remember Albert Beckles?
Yeah.
He was one of my heroes growing up. Al Beckles was like, they called him the Methuselah of bodybuilding. He was like, 55, 60 years old. And I mean, let's be completely honest. And listeners, I think, know this. These guys aren't natural, okay? So, so they have youthful hormone levels, and there's no way these guys would look like that, you know, through the course of natural aging. So, but I don't care. I mean, frankly, personally, I don't care. I'm amazed and impressed. But Phil, you said you looked at some of this. I don't know if you've been keeping up over the years or what, but
No, not a ton. I just always try and peek in there and look at it. And I'm in agreement with you that Heidi Chupin was jacked. I mean,
wow.
I think what he had going. I'm not a professional in any way to judge bodybuilders. I think the only thing that he may have had going against him is he's a little thicker in the waist and things like that. He's built more like a powerhouse than some of the others.
Yeah,
but man, he is
flavor.
He's got some wheels on him. So that,
yeah.
Yeah. And other than that, I was just looking at the expo and things like that because I like comparing them to the Arnold, and because my first big expo was the Olympia, and back then, 14 years ago or whatever it is, it was a big thing, and it seems a lot smaller, and there's just not the hype around it anymore that there used to be compared to the Arnold. It seems like everybody's gears up for that now, but that also could because the crowds I run in and the strongman and the powerlifting and the Highland Games and things like that is much bigger at the Arnold. So
yeah. Well, if anybody has any comments about the Olympia, if you think we're under-covering it, I can appreciate that. We are.
Yeah. Just being honest.
Yeah, but I mean, there are some really good videos out there, and I think this isn't something best done just in a podcast. I mean, we could talk about certain nuances if we knew them, but that would be boring compared to watching. Again, I'm looking at one called 2019 Mr. Olympia Finals Analysis Top 3 Call Out, and it's pretty good. So go take a look if you're interested in that kind of stuff. I think if you're interested in strength, you're like Phil, you at least want to check in and see, you know, what are the best built people in the world, supposedly. Yeah. You know, I know Arnold always said that was funny, but what are these enormous ripped guys? What are they looking like? I mean, if you like strength, you're going to like muscle on some level. That's what this whole podcast is built around. So anyway. Okay, that's the sports stuff. We have some science stuff. Mike, you had something on red meat, but this time it wasn't derogatory.
Yeah, surprisingly, it actually wasn't. This is from the IFT.org. So Dr. Lonnie and I were out there in Vegas 2 years ago now for the Institute of Food Technology meeting. And it says red meat consumption may not be linked to poor health outcomes. A panel of international scientists suggests that most people can continue to eat red meat and even processed meat as they do now without cause for concern. So that was kind of interesting. This is published October 1st, 2019. And the article talks about that there's a review of 12 trials of 54,000 people. Researchers did not find statistical significant or any important association between red meat consumption and the risk of heart disease, diabetes, or cancer.
Interesting.
Yeah. They go on to say in 3 systematic reviews of cohort studies following millions of people, a very small reduction in risk among those who had 3 or fewer servings of red or processed meat a week, but the association was uncertain. So, yeah, and then talk to us a little bit more about the studies and what was actually going on in them. But I don't know, I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, that's not the typical headline we see, because red meat's been kind of thrown under the bus a lot lately and associated with all sorts of stuff. But then you actually go pull the study that it was from, and you're like, I don't know. It doesn't really seem to be all that strong of evidence. So.
Right. Yeah. In fact, the other week I did a solo bit when we were all running in different directions, and it was very. One thing was about this leaf jerky product, which to me, this is my bias, right? I don't want to get sued by anybody, but I'm much less interested in soy jerky than I am in beef with a B, beef jerky. But at the same time, there were other news bits about how eggs and meat can provide choline and help with neurotransmission, and that could be cognitive or sort of muscular communication, right? Neuromuscular function. And, so we keep ripping on this stuff and forgetting a little bit about the zoo chemicals and things like that. But, in fact, Mike, did you have something on growth factors and nerve conduction, or did you have that now?
Yeah, there's another study from Science News talking about why strength training may come at the expense of endurance muscles. I think the headline, if you read the article, is a little bit overblown. But what's super interesting is they talked about BDNF, which is a neurotransmitter, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And usually this is thought of in response to possibly some food, some supplements, and especially aerobic exercise. You can look up even John Radley's old book called Spark has a lot of really good information about it. But in the past, it's kind of been thought that this is, as the name suggests, just something that happens in the brain. And they stated here that BDNF actually acts in the muscle so that during strength training, endurance muscle fiber number is actually possibly decreased. There's some researchers from Brazil looking at the different effects of myokines. So these are little hormone messengers that are actually secreted by muscle. So it just kind of goes on to talk that BDNF may actually act on muscles and specific synapses. BDNF may actually help convert endurance muscle maybe into strength muscle, and also looking at it in relation to muscle training with age-related muscle atrophy or sarcopenia. So what I thought was super interesting is that a lot of times these, myokines now, we wouldn't think of BDNF as a myokine, but it appears that it might be. And so systemically, maybe doing different effects on the muscle, maybe different organ systems compared to what it's doing in the brain. And that's what I think makes research looking at specific compounds very hard, right? So we've talked a lot about CBD and different, cannabinoids in the past, and some of those do some stuff very similar. They have different effects in the brain as compared to in the body. Some cross the blood-brain barrier, some don't. So a lot of times just looking at the specific compound, in this case, BDNF, it may have different effects depending upon where it's secreted and where it comes from.
So we've talked in the past about how lots of cardio, like cross-training, hampers strength gains. I mean, there's some good data on this, right? It started with a lot of general physical preparedness stuff, military data and all that kind of stuff. You have somebody run constantly and they don't get as muscularly jacked. This is almost mechanistic for that kind of thing. It's in reverse maybe. If you spend so much time on the strength, you can't expect to be an aerobic powerhouse. Is that fair?
I would agree. I mean, the way I explain it to students is that we know that there's an interference effect, right? And that's what it's technically called. At some point, you don't see jacked bodybuilders winning marathons, right? You don't see, endurance athletes winning powerlifting events. So we know that at some level it happens. The question then is what level and where? And there's some older classic studies looking at strength training and then followed by immediate moderate intensity aerobic training for 20 to 40 minutes. And they show that if you sandwich them right after each other, one study done in females, that your vertical jump, but especially speed and power, definitely go down. And how I explain it to students is that if you've got a very large anaerobic fiber, right? So anaerobic means it doesn't need to use oxygen. You don't have to worry about oxygen diffusing across the cell. It's not using oxygen, so it can get really big in size, right? The hypertrophy. And you don't have to worry about that as a concern. If you've got a smaller aerobic fiber, at some point you have to get oxygen to diffuse across that cell because it's using oxygen. It's an aerobic fiber. So you're going to be limited by how big that fiber can get because you're limited by how much oxygen can diffuse across that. just called the Krog cylinder model. But what's interesting over the years is now you have sports like CrossFit. And I was talking to you guys in Tahoe that, 5-10 years ago, if you would have told me that the level of CrossFit athletes would have gotten to where they're at now, I would have said, you're batshit crazy. There's no way. And now we've got, athletes who are basically doing, hybrid type exercise. Now they're not as strong as powerlifters. They're not as fast as, elite aerobic athletes. But they've shown that you can push that kind of intermediate hybrid spectrum up pretty damn high, which I think is impressive and also makes all the research and everything else even more confusing, right? Because you're looking at the output of that. And so a lot of the way that they train, unless you're an elite athlete, you're just doing a lot of Metcons. But if I have someone who comes to me, I'll look to see what is their aerobic base, what is their strength, what is their weaker of those two, and then they'll have dedicated sessions that are only focused on that. So Monday maybe only strength and power, Tuesday or Wednesday maybe aerobic base. So I try to split them out a little bit to get the adaptation I want. But the end result, when you compete at this kind of hybrid level, you can get to a higher level than what I thought was possible in the past.
Right. Phil, where do you draw that line? Something Mike just said I found, well, it had its personal connection to me, but as far as it's at what point do these things become problematic, right? And some of your people are pretty elite. So
Yeah.
Where do you say, all right, stop the conditioning, this is now interfering?
That depends on, it really comes down to a client's ultimate goal. That's like if somebody comes to me and says they want to be the best powerlifter ever, then we're going to have to sit down and have a realistic talk about many things. And part of that's going to be, conditioning level. You're going to have to let some of that go to a point. It depends on your weight class and things like that. But even then, I think even powerlifting has changed. And I'm not a big believer in the out of shape powerlifter. I think there is some conditioning that needs to be done just to get you through a session, a correct session. But we're not going to be in any way. Like right now, I am not ready to run a Spartan race. But I am very conditioned for a powerlifting meet. So, and it even shifts during the season. Like when I'm out of season, we do a lot more conditioning and stuff. For my powerlifters, it's a lot more strongman stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's 30 to 60 seconds of output, things like that, numerous times. So just to get ourselves ready and prepared to go through hard training sessions. And then, like Mike said, if I've dealt with numerous people for CrossFit games and things like that, and usually it's just figuring out what their weakness is, and 90% of the time that's strength.
Yeah.
And if you take an athlete, and basically we can look at baselines across any sport and figure out what are the top people doing. We average that out. So then generally what I do is, okay, we need to be 10% stronger than that, whatever those baselines are. Once we get there, then we can worry about pushing the endurance up.
Okay.
Because it's a lot harder the strength just takes longer. If we get your strength up to par, now we can save that and start putting some miles on your motor and your ability to endure more with your current level of strength. So,
yeah, that makes sense to me.
I love it when I get a new CrossFit athlete who is very strong but has horrible aerobic performance.
Oh, it's easy.
Because I know I can fix their aerobic performance if they'll just hang in with the program in probably a few months.
Yes.
Yeah.
Versus someone who I had this case a couple of years ago, and he didn't sign on because I told him, I said, hey, you're probably 3 to 5 years out of just hardcore strength training to get to the level you need to be competitive at where you want to be, in the games.
Yep.
That's just the reality. Unless you make other choices that I'm not going to be involved in, it's going to take many, many years because you just don't have the strength, and that's a long process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The reason when I said a personal connection, I remember, and I've said this on the years past, but I was very engaged in competitive martial arts. Up to a regional and level, black belt. I was in it for a long time. Well, not a very long time, but talking about 6 years in one and 2 in another art. But the point being is, I had an old martial arts instructor say, Lonnie, enough with the weightlifting. You don't have to be Mr. whatever. And I remember looking at him and I said, with respect, sir, I do. Yes, I do. I need to be a Mr. something. For me, that tipping point was when I started getting up around like 175, 180. I started feeling kind of gassed at the ends of these long 3-hour workouts. And this was not MMA. This is very traditional stuff. This was just Taekwondo is what I'm talking about now. So imagine, like, in competitive events, I would have to blow people away fairly early on, because if they drug me out for too long, I'm carrying all this baggage. Even if it was muscle mass, and you might think 180, Lonnie, that's not big, but at 5'9", and after 3 hours of working out, that's dragging you down, kind of thing. But I always like the strength stuff, and I think at some point, Mike, to your point about tipping point, it does become a problem. You have to ultimately specialize in, like Phil said, what is my goal? And they're pushing it really far these days. I admit, the cross-training ability is more than I would have ever guessed. I would have thought the specificity principle would not have allowed it. But.
No, it's definitely higher. But, I mean, in the end of the day, the best are still concentrating on one thing, and they always will.
That's right.
It's just the way it's going to be.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, I play around with students, and I say, why are the best in the world less fit in general? And I want them to talk about the 5 components of physical fitness, right, and how different sports exemplify them. Yeah, and I often tell the story about how powerlifters, and Phil, you know what this feels like. You go up a flight of stairs, you're grabbing your knees and wheezing, but you're laughing about it because you don't give a damn at that point, right?
Yeah.
And in fact,
not the point.
In fact, it's a badge of honor because it means you're big.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, and last quick point on that too is that people forget that VO2 max has a very high genetic component. We've got pretty good data on that. I have seen a couple of freaks that can do a lot of lifting, and their VO2 max or their aerobic capacity just doesn't really go down that much. And when we've actually tested a handful of them, their VO2 max was surprisingly high. And usually it's a similar history of, I started in high school, I was a long-distance runner, and I just didn't train much, and I destroyed everyone, and they just kind of, switched gears along the way. So looking a lot of times at what they're doing for training may not necessarily give you all the answers you want either. So.
Yeah, until they put on 30 pounds, and then their
it changes for sure.
Their VO2 max is going to go down because it's relative to their body weight. Right.
Yeah. But it's still a lot of times I find higher than some other people who just never really trained aerobically either. So
right, totally. In fact, not to belabor this much more, but you guys remember FloJo, Florence Griffith Joyner. She was like fastest woman in the world, I think. And then late career, and she's gone. I think she died in the late 90s, but late career, she made this like wholesale switch to endurance. If I'm thinking right, that it was her. And that blew me away. It just shows how, like you said, almost genetically superior you can do whatever you want. I don't know. Anyway, I want to touch on one thing, Mike, because I know you have to go here in a second, but I thought you might be interested in this. This is from labroots.com. Does True Brain really work? TRU brain. Apparently it's this nootropic type thing that's popular with businessmen, and this almost starts reading like an ad, and I was a little shocked. Now they do clarify later in the article, because again I rely on LabRoots as a great little news catcher for actual news, and I don't want ads presented to me as news, right? I've actually seen that. Kelly and I were talking about that this morning. Back in the day, I know for a fact, I watched this happen, that a company bought a segment on the news, and it wasn't presented as an ad. It was presented as news. And I thought, wow, okay. Yeah. So does True Brain really work? It says this product is a mix of different substances claimed to help people increase verbal fluency, avoid distractions, and boost mental output. It was apparently created by some UCLA scientists. It's sort of, they do refer to it as a concoction. They say it's popular with business people and students. Does it really work? I guess you can get it as a drink or a tablet. Now, then they start talking, as evidence, they say feedback for the product is mixed. An Amazon rating of 3.6 out of 5. I've never seen Amazon ratings presented as evidence for something. But, okay. And then it goes on, it says, However, other people, despite its popularity, have reported either no difference or even side effects from anxiety to panic attacks at night. And again, pointing to Amazon as the evidence for that. But here's what the mechanism. This goes back to what we were saying before. If you dwell too much on mechanisms, we lose track of the actual outcome. But it says it purportedly increases blood flow, which they say creates new neural connections. Now, as a sidebar, people have been talking about ginkgo for a long time with blood flow. So this kind of mechanism doesn't seem that new to me. But anyway, blood flow may create new neural connections. It says other nootropics focus on the brain's acetylcholine receptors, leading to more efficient communication. But then it also talks about other, I guess, substances in this cocktail, like magnesium and tyrosine. And then they even say carnitine. Carnitine acting as a, quote, food source, allowing neurons to break down glucose and fatty acids for energy. Oh, boy. I'm not sure. There's some rough spots to that right there. I'm not going to get into for time. But, yeah, I mean, magnesium, there's always that. This is a long-going argument that maybe people tend to be slightly deficient, like there's a subclinical deficiency in magnesium. I actually take a little bit of magnesium at night. Tyrosine, that we know as an amino acid, single amino acids can have drug-like effects, and if you take a lot of tyrosine, it may actually help with adrenaline production and stuff like that. I've actually measured some urinary metabolites of that kind of stuff in the past. The stuff about food source and breaking down glucose and fatty acids, that's a bit of a reach for me. Anyway, the company claims to have done some EEG, right, electroencephalograms on people, but there was no placebo group. It had 7 people total in the study. This is the kind of stuff that we've all seen supplement companies do before. They hire like a fly-by-night lab, and I'm not saying this is necessarily wrong. It's just, there are a couple of issues here with it. It does say the company cites studies highlighting the efficacy of individual compounds in True Brain. These compounds including L-theanine, caffeine, but again, we're down to the individual ingredients, and I think L-theanine and caffeine probably do work when stacked together. There's multiple papers on that. I'm interested in that kind of stuff myself. As a disclaimer, I mean, that's a part of what I'm interested in. Actually, I have a patent related to those things because they probably work. But in any case, it says, despite this, True Brain probably does have some positive effect. Again, this is the article itself saying this. Caffeine and L-theanine are examples known to increase feelings of alertness, focus, and positive mood, something that may inevitably enable people to concentrate better. And again, they go on about how people might have a magnesium deficiency. Mike, I know you're also interested in product development potentially down the road with different things like this, and you just like nootropic research. Any thoughts about this sort of thing? Have you heard about True Brain?
Yeah.
I guess it's really popular.
Yeah, I mean, I tried it when it first came out. They went through a couple of iterations kind of early on, and the little packets they had, the last version I saw was pretty good. Convenient-wise was good. Taste was pretty good. One of the main researchers behind it is Dr. Andrew Hill, who runs the Peak Brain Institute in Southern California, I believe. So they do a lot of neurofeedback, right? So that's probably where they got the EEG data from. In terms of ingredients, I mean, some of them are pretty solid, right? So L-theanine, caffeine you talked about. There's some other which are not really considered classic racetams, but kind of in that area. Uridine, centralphefine, Nupept, and then other ones that we know probably have pretty good effects. Tyrosine, especially if you can get a high enough dose. N-acetylcarnitine has some pretty good brain data, although I don't agree with the little expert they had. That seems like someone plucked L-carnitine, proposed mechanisms, and stuck it in there, so I'm not sure where that came from. But acetylcholine, right, which is CDP choline, has some actually pretty good data on that. The main researcher on that's Dr. Renshaw. He's presented a fair amount of that, actually him and his wife. So just some, okay data on it. I tried it, and if you talk to Andrew Hill about it, they wanted stuff that was more mild, not really any crazy stuff the FDA may potentially ban, but they wanted something that would kind of help for more of a daily use. He said he purposely didn't put a lot of caffeine in there because that can have downsides with sleep and other effects there also.
Yeah.
And when I tried it, focus, things like that seemed to be a little bit better. I didn't notice any super crazy effects from it, but, I don't think you would expect that from the ingredient profile either.
Yeah.
The other part, too, is that on a lot of nootropics, if you have sleep or not have sleep makes a big difference. So I've used some other ones from like Neurohacker Collective and things of that nature, Qualia, and creative writing, things like that I've noticed are better. But if I don't have a lot of sleep, then, the only thing that really seems to help is stuff in more of the stimulant realm. So I think if people are looking for a nootropic to make up for their 2 hours of missed sleep, probably not going to happen. You just stick with coffee and get some sleep. If you're looking for other effects, I think some of them can help. I've noticed that even just from talking to people that do formulations, there's a lot of variability from one person to the next, right? So you start getting into brain-specific things. And even people who do neurofeedback will tell you that, how one brain works versus the next, you can see pretty big differences there. So compounds that affect it, you're probably going to see a pretty wide variation there also.
Now, they do say, and you mentioned this, it's oxiracetam. Is that how you pronounce that?
They have a couple of ones that do have some what they're called racetams in them. It's just it's kind of a classic. So the first standard sort of nootropic is piracetam,
right?
Which was developed many years ago.
Yep.
They've always been kind of existed at the FDA as kind of this gray area, and so everyone's been trying to modify the kind of molecule and call it, it's a racetam. But then people get crazy and do like a phenylracetam, which really is more of a stimulant, not really a racetam because of the phenyl modification. But so far, the FDA has considered those in most countries, at least in the U.S., that they're still legal. But every once in a while, they get kind of crazy and they're like, these aren't found in the, foods and things of that nature, which I'm pretty sure when they developed it, they wanted to make sure they had good supporting data on that. That's probably also why in the ad copy it'll say food sources. Because if you can show that it's in, the food chain, the shea, all that kind of stuff, it's probably not going to see the wrath of the FDA.
Yeah, I actually wondered. I first heard of piracetam ages ago. Oh, man, there were some guys at UCLA that were interested. I thought it was a drug. But apparently it's sold as a supplement, and I'm just playing catch up with this. I mean, I remember it's something about helping acetylcholine receptors work better or something. I don't know.
It's supposed to help neuronal fluidity, but even now, like the stuff I've read, I don't know if anyone understands the exact mechanism of how it works. Yeah. And I don't believe a lot of the ad copy that says how it works either. But yeah, I bought some of it, probably in the early 2000s. And I put it in some green tea, and man, if you get actual piracetam, it tastes bad. It has this burnt tire aftertaste to it. I was like, oh god.
If it's true that it somehow helps acetylcholine receptors or something about like electron transport, energy production, something like that, my Frankenstein brain starts thinking, oh, well, wouldn't that help with the literally like the end terminal, like the neuromuscular connection, and not just CNS. I don't know if that's true, but it'd be fun to play with. Give Phil some and see what happens.
Yeah. I've looked for data on that, and just racetams in general. I haven't seen much in the performance area. I haven't anecdotally heard much about it. I haven't noticed anything myself per se. Choline donors, you can a little bit, like alpha GPC. There's a couple studies on that. Acetylcholine, there's some studies on that too. Last part too, if you're using higher-ish doses of racetams, you probably want to take more choline with it, because it can deplete out choline levels also. Mm-hmm. So alpha GPC, acetylcholine, or more egg yolks, things of that nature can help.
Now that's interesting, because I was very nonplussed by a lot of the alpha GPC stuff when it first came out. They were looking at growth hormone release and stuff, but I was
I don't think it does shit for growth hormone. I'm not so convinced by that part.
Right. Okay.
But some speed and power stuff, there's a couple studies that are pretty good. It's still a very expensive raw material. Chemi Nutra has some other studies that are supposed to be coming out on it. But stuff like that's been on the market for quite a while. I would love to see other labs and more data of just, hey, yay or nay. And I just haven't seen a lot of data, period, on it.
All right. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to table this last bit. I have a couple of things. Apparently, the whole genetically modified food thing is blowing up. I don't know if anybody's heard about this, but I wanted to share a little bit about that. GMO foods and whatnot. Well, we could table that till next week. So there's some mail-in news for everybody. Mike, I know you got to go give a talk on probably neurologically related stuff. Isn't it pain or something? And Phil's got to get going. So, all right, folks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Hey, listeners. Have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry. And they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.